It's absolutely crap. And it's absolutely brilliant. No, it's crap. Brilliant. No, it's crap. So initially, on receiving it straight out of the box, I noticed that mine was on and flashing. I don't know if you can turn it off, but anyway, so that was a little odd. But anyway, it comes in quite a nice box, although considering the amount of money spent, I kind of feel like it should be in a gold-plated chest. Let's have a look inside. Download, I use an Android phone, so downloaded on Google Play. That was absolutely no problem installation. The app looks fairly simple to use. Let's look at attaching it to the bike. Right, so there's the Shockwiz mounted. I've already got it muddy, etc. But what you don't know is that video I started 4 years ago. So it's been 4 years down the line, and what are my impressions of the Quarq Shockwiz? Well, it's absolutely crap, and it's absolutely brilliant. It's both. It depends on how you use it, and I think to an extent, if you use it how they say or you would expect to use it, it's not going to be that good. In other words, you can't whack this on your bike, do a couple of rides, and it's going to sort your suspension out. However, if you own one rather than hire one and you have it on your bike over a number of months, I've managed to tune the suspension to a point where my fork just felt absolutely amazing. My riding came on, I was faster. So now I want to talk about a couple of the downsides and the upsides. So downside, as I said, it isn't going to quickly sort out your suspension, particularly if you're not anywhere near close. Secondly, it doesn't measure the ratio all of that well, and it's really easy to get it wrong if you go through, the compression ratio. If you go through that process, it's really easy to get it wrong. What I've found is that you can confirm whether or not you've got it right with a couple of things. Firstly, if you've got a fork with percentage markings written on it, you can confirm if the compression ratio is correctly set by pressing it to 20, 30% and everything in between, and seeing if the Shockwiz is actually reading it correctly, and it wants to be absolutely spot on. So if it's measured for any reason the compression ratio wrong, that will be out. So what I would do also is, Shockwiz suggests riding, like you might do a couple of rides, or maybe just like a few downhills on a day out. Then you look at the suggestions, you make some changes, and then you reset. What I've found works best, particularly if you're already relatively close, is to do several rides, to keep on riding. Do several weekends, different, like long term, keep checking on what its suggestions are, and then maybe move just one thing, one click in the direction it suggests. Don't reset it, and then ride several more weekends, because what happens is it averages it out, and the older data becomes less and less relevant. But instead of starting completely afresh with a bunch of data, which is different riding, and therefore it might come up with some slightly different suggestions, it's still basing it on the data that you previously had, but the change starts to get incorporated into it. So it's a much longer process, but boy, can you get the suspension set super sweet doing it that way. Aggression and progression. It's very hard to progress in your mountain biking skills if your suspension is not set up for doing anything more than you normally ride. The moment you do a drop that's a bit bigger than you're used to, the landing's going to be horrible. The moment you go a bit faster down something gnarly, it's going to feel horrible. In my opinion, you always want the suspension, unless it's 150 or less, any long travel 160 and upwards, you always want the last 10% set in reserve. That allows you to progress your riding. So
you can go a little bit faster and harder. But that also means when you're setting up with the Shockwizz, you need to ride the hardest trails that you do all of the time, and it'll tweak on that. If you ride around doing a whole bunch of cross country, it's going to tell you how to set it up for cross country, and then you're not going to progress. And if you want to progress, do all your data logging, riding aggressively as much as you can. Now, another downside I found as this got older and it had firmware updates and also possibly moisture got in it, I don't really know, it's always been dry, but this started eating batteries. So anyway, in the end, I found a flipping brilliant solution. So what I did, I just got rechargeable button cells. Now, it turns out, not only obviously are you not worrying about buying button cells constantly and throwing them into landfill, but these have got vastly higher capacity, like probably 10 times more capacity than the standard button cells. So even though it was running the other ones down quite quickly, I'm now doing weeks of riding using the rechargeable ones without it running down. So it works much better. So that's one of my other bits of advice. So now let's have a quick look at the app. I'm reading the app. I've got it on the big screen just to help. So at the moment we're showing 69 psi, which I'm, it's a little low because the bike is hanging from the ceiling. So we've got a bit of negative fork pressure, which is why we're showing minus 1.2%. So you obviously got tuning style, planted, poppy, active, soft, neutral, firm. Now, an element of this, what you set this, in my opinion, an element of it is whether you're setting up a shock or a fork and how aggressive a rider you are, basically. So I'm not a massively aggressive rider. I'm not hitting massive, enormous jumps, etc. So for me, I have it soft poppy on a fork, but I might have it more neutral and planted for a shock, because you don't want to get, kicked over the bar. So your shock is always going to want to be a little bit slower and more controlled, whereas your fork, you want the grip, you need it to be as active as possible. Now, on the app, it says confidence 100%. This basically means how much data has it got? Has it got enough data to give you an opinion? Now, and in my opinion, when it reaches 100%, that's kind of like the absolute minimum. It's the longer you leave this running and the more different stuff that you ride, particularly aggressively, I think it becomes more and more accurate. And that score, like this is only run for a few rides, even though it's saying 100%. That score, I know if I continue riding the bike and hit some more aggressive trails and I hit them more aggressively, that score will come up, because it'll actually start to sort of realise, I'm a bit more aggressive and it's set up more correctly for a bit more aggressive riding than I've done so far. It's only ever going to advise you based on the kind of riding that it records. So it's, if you want to progress, ride hard. It'll tell you, for that hard riding style that you're doing, that what's wrong, and then you'll make some tweaks and it'll improve it. And then you might be able to find that you can ride a little bit more aggressively. Again, record some data because you've improved it, and then it'll tell you how to improve it again. If you just ride what you do normally and you set up for how you ride normally, it's just going to say everything's fine. So you want to just bear that in mind. So suggestions. So here it's saying high speed and low speed, one in each direction. Well, I don't have split high speed and low speed, so I can pretty much ignore this. But also, what you want to think about is quite often it's going to be saying low speed, make firmer. And it's going to be saying that because I'm showing Poor Bob. And Poor Bob is about pedaling efficiency. We're on an e-bike. We don't care about pedaling efficiency. So you can both ignore that, but also ignore the fact that it's saying to make slow speed compression firmer. Put those two things together, ignore them. Ignore the high speed, make softer, because I don't have it. It's just built in. It has some in the fork. The remove air, that's because I am not using full travel. Statistics, no deep compression events, but that's because I haven't done any of the biggest drops that I do. I want this bike to be able to handle not the absolute biggest drop that I ever do perfectly, but there's a couple that I do reasonably regularly, just haven't done in the few rides that this has been on, and it needs to be set up to take those without completely bottoming out. So if I'd done those, this would probably have a couple of deep compression events and it wouldn't be saying remove air. So that's a very, very quick run over of the app, but I think I've pretty much covered everything. Just to summarize, more data, better, more aggressive riding if you want to progress within that data, and make sure you include, you know, the biggest drops that you're going to do to flat, or with, you know, and that kind of thing within that data, for it to give you a decent setup. Start with your correct by manufacturer pressure and let it tune it away for you from there. And I also forgot to mention, I've got another trip coming up this weekend, so it might be a week or two before it's edited, but there's some other videos going to be popping up as well. So it's all go. I've been horrendously ill for weeks. I still feel incredibly fatigued, so there's a limit to what I can do at the moment, and what I've got planned this weekend is pretty bonkers.